Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Keough's Corner. This week we have an excellent program that I think that folks at home will enjoy, and it's really, the focus is about parenting in the new millennium and the challenges of parenting in the new millennium. And I have three wonderful guests with me today. We have Mr. Wes Paul, the Oliver Ames High School principal, Pauline Dobrowski, who is the Vice President for Student Affairs at Stonehill College. Thank you for joining us. And Jeanne Baxter, who is a 6th grade teacher at Easton Middle School. And I really intentionally selected these folks for this panel discussion on the basis of the fact that they work with kids really on the other end of the scale. Not the kids coming in, but the kids who've been through school for a while. Plus, all of us have children of our own. So, and we do know there are challenges facing kids, and it's not the same time that we grew up in. Things have changed. So, but what I'd like to do is start out with this basic exercise, and I want us all to stop and think about what it was that we wanted for our children when we first had children. So take yourself back to that date. For me, it could be 25 years ago with my oldest. I hate to admit that, but 25 years ago, thinking about what I wanted for my daughter as she went through her life, because the first one was the one I wanted to make sure I got it right. So let's go through that and think about what were you hoping for? What were your hopes or dreams for your kids?
Beyond sleeping through the night.
Yeah, beyond. Yeah. Once we got past that, and you could actually, in that moment of
short-term goals,
yes,
but the long-term, to be a good person, to be self-sufficient, and to make an impact somehow in society. Lofty goal, but you do. I mean,
yeah. No, I mean, the self-sufficiency thing to me was so important. I was just so afraid that my kids would get eaten up by the world. So I wanted them to have that, that ability to stand on their own 2 feet. That was hugely important. Pauline, what were you thinking?
Yeah, of course. I mean, building off of what Jeanne said, I always tell my kids that the most important thing in life is being kind to others. And so, I want them to be kind individuals. I want them to be happy. And so, want to make sure that they find their passion in life and what fulfills them, and that they're confident about who they are and comfortable with themselves and who they've become, and that they contribute in good ways. That they're not only inward focused, but they really focus on others and what it means to be a good friend and a contributing member of a larger society.
I think you thought about this.
I have thought about that a lot. I know.
Very good answer.
And I remind them of that often when things happen.
Well, I mean, you said it all.
Yeah.
But happy to me really boils it down to what it's really about. We just want our kids to be happy, right? I just desperately wanted my kids to be happy. I still remember in kindergarten, the teacher sending the note home at the beginning of the year. Yeah. What is it that you want from me for your children? And I sat with my wife, and I remember we were crying because we were like, I just want her to be loved, to be happy, to have someone there if she falls down or she's afraid, doesn't know what to do. I just wanted to be sure that she was loved and ultimately happy. Yeah. And I think that's all that most parents want.
And knowing what makes them happy might be different from we thought it might be, and being supportive of that.
Well, happiness is a tricky thing.
Yes.
It's very difficult to find happiness.
And happy for the right reason, because there's times like no kid's going to be happy about doing homework, and then it's okay for them not to be happy.
That's right.
Like I think it's that.
It's so true.
I know when they're very young, I have to think back to, I had 3 daughters in about 3.5 years, and 2 of them were always very happy doing their homework, and 1 of them not so much so. But when they're young, they do have that enthusiam for schoolwork that tends to wear off a little bit as they move their way through the schools. But for me, and looking at what we wanted as a couple, Janet and I, for our kids, I think most of the attributes you've mentioned are what all parents want. I think for us too, it was wanting them to understand what a good life was,
Yeah.
and that a good life doesn't necessarily always equate to being happy, but that you're pursuing, your dreams that take hard work, and making sure our kids understood that you have to put the work in order to experience that good life, and to define a good life not based on what society tells you it is, but what you have internalized based on the values you get from your parents and your grandparents and your family. And so for us, I think all of the attributes of happy and healthy and kind and compassionate, but also that understanding of what do you want your life to be and why, and how do you pursue that, and teaching that the value of hard work, that you may not be happy doing your homework, but it's a necessary, I don't want to say evil, it's a necessary task in life that you have to embrace, because there are things in your work, my work, we all do things that I don't think any of us pull up to the desk and are excited to do, similar to what a student experiences when they pull up to the desk to do homework. But we have to model to them that whole pursuit of what our life is going to be in terms of being good, and that it takes some resiliency and some hard work.
Yeah.
So as we think about it, we have pretty clear pictures in our minds of what we wanted for our children. And yet, as we go along in life, in the schools right now, I was a principal for 11 years, and 8 years before that as an assistant principal, all at the high school level, saw a lot of challenging situations come up. And frequently, I can't tell you how often a kid would get in trouble, and a parent would perhaps, so none of this was in Easton, but a parent would perhaps come to the rescue of the kid. And can you talk about if that's happened with you, Wes, and why you see that as a problem?
I see two different perspectives on that. I see so many of our students coming to school with a lot of the skills we want them to have in terms of self-advocacy and being able to navigate the consequences for behavior. But I also see the parent who is trying to advocate for their child in a situation in which we as educators really want the child to navigate. We want the child to negotiate the situation and to go through the process, because just like playing sports or being on a musical or whatever, not every single person on the team or on the ensemble is the best, and that you're going to get constructive feedback, or you're going to have your ups and your downs. In school, there are ups and downs. Some students have more downs than ups occasionally, and there are consequences to that. Every school I've worked in, the administrators and the teachers are people of integrity, and they want what's best for the child. And I think there are times in which the parent struggles with letting those outside caregivers provide the structure to teach the child the lesson, and they want to protect them from that. And so that's where they come in, and they tend to try to negotiate with you perhaps what actually took place, instead of listening to their child and what their child told us originally, and kind of work with us. Because generally speaking, when we have, and most of our interactions are like that, where you have that positive interaction with the parents and the student about what took place, it's all good things take place. There's growth, and and there's, as you probably remember, you see the kid the next day and you're saying, "Hey Wes, how you doing?" Or, "Hey, Andrew, how's it going?" And the kid realizes what happened is gone. Just like as a parent, you don't keep a running tab on the misbehaviors of your adult, your children. You tend to forgive and move on.
Right. I think it's really difficult for me as a parent. I would classify myself as the good cop. And so it's hard for me. It's easier for my wife to say no. It's really difficult for me to say no, because I don't want any of my daughters to suffer in any way. I love them that much. And the irony of it is that they have to. They have to, if they're going to have those things that I want. That ability to stand on their own 2 feet, that resiliency that comes with not getting your own way and being able to keep fighting and not give up. My intentions were always good. Always, always, always. I will not allow this person to speak to my kid that way, or
It
You know,
comes from a good place.
It does come from a good place. It always came from a good place. But what I never thought about was whether or not there was any downside for my child, because if I thought that through, I probably wouldn't have done it.
We were talking downstairs earlier, and such a simplistic example, but as a parent, you want the best for your kid and you don't want them to ever struggle. And when Abby was a baby, and I brought her into school and I'm breaking up Cheerios, and one of the teachers was watching, why are you breaking them up? So she doesn't choke. And how's she ever going to learn to gag if you don't allow her to at least try, negotiate them? That's right. It was like this eye-opening, and I think of that, it's so silly, but whether it's a Cheerio or whether it's college, it's that same thing, like allow her, a controlled failure, I guess.
Yeah.
But that idea that it comes from a good place, but stepping back in the long run, how's that going to be helpful? How's that going to translate to these skills we want them to have?
And what Andrew just said, in terms of as a parent and knowing a parent doesn't want to see their child experiencing that difficulty, we as educators and at the college level, you see it a lot, I would venture to guess, in comparison to 10, 15, 20 years ago, is the anxiety levels of students are increasing when they go to school. And a lot of that is because they are trying to negotiate challenges without the supports in place.
Right.
And so part of our job in the schools is to prepare them for that, to get them to that point where minor skirmishes, so to speak, minor interference takes place, and the parent says, you need to take that care of that with your math teacher, and I don't need to get involved with this. You need to take care of that with your English teacher, and allow the student to figure those skills out, so when they go off to the next chapter and the next chapter, they're not end up with 60 minutes, interviewing them and their mom as one of the helicopter parents that, you hear people talk about. That there is a progression of giving that, I tell kids all the time, high school is like a flight simulator. We're not ready to give you the Boeing 747 yet. We're asking you to get in the flight simulator and guess what? You're going to crash.
Right.
That's okay. We're still going to put you back in and let you try again.
Yeah.
And I think the more we as educators can convey our care for kids and why we want them to work some of this out with us and not their parents, the better prepared they are for eventually having to fly solo and not in a simulator.
That's right.
And
one of the things we talk about during first year parent orientation is we review a little bit of student development theory. And part of student development theory really focuses on when students hit a challenge or a crisis, and however that crisis is defined, they have an opportunity for growth. And that significant growth happens when a student works to navigate that challenge and to apply critical thinking and problem solving skills to that. And during those moments, that's when they build the confidence to then be able to address the next challenge in a more confident or competent or skillful way. And so what we talk to parents about is resisting the urge, because of course parents want what's best and they want to step in and help, that you can still help and be a support and guide them, but it's the way in which you do that. So instead of stepping in and doing for them, it's helping them think through or talk through, so what is the issue? What do you think you could do? What might be the first step you would try? And to help them to think and to process, but in the end, if the student is the one addressing the issue, then they're going to see a positive result and will be able to then grow through that process to better prepare them for the next time. The other thing we talk about is this, the topic of stress and how so many people think of stress as this inherently negative thing. But research really shows that stress can be extremely positive. If you think about situations, and you might have friends or colleagues that say, I work really well under pressure. Because what happens is that your cognitive functions sharpen, you start thinking, you start planning better, you take action. And during those moments where things might be heightened, you're seeing a lot of success and productivity. And so I think sometimes it's reframing our thought of what stress is and how it might impact us, and that it can be positive. Because I think there are, I mean, obviously, we do see at the institution, we do see more and more students coming to college. The number one concern that's presented at college counseling centers is anxiety, and that has significantly increased over the number
Do they
of
talk about
years.
what they're anxious about?
A lot of times the anxiety, it could be around a whole host of different things, but a lot of it has to do with they've been in situations where expectations have been set very high, which is fine, because we also know too that students, for the most part, if you set realistic expectations, but high expectations for them, majority of the times they rise to the occasion. But I think there's a lot of comparison that's out there with students. I think there's that desire, and social media really feeds into this, to be the best, to be successful, to get into the best institution, to have the most extracurricular activities, to have the most likes on Facebook, followers on Instagram, whatever it might be. And their perception of looking at friends or others on social media is they're seeing the positive that are being posted from their peers. But that doesn't always tell the story. And so what they might see is, boy, everyone's doing so well, why am I struggling?
Everyone has friends. Look
Everyone
at these
has,
kids.
right.
Look how many friends
Or they had this
have.
many likes, and I only had,
Yes, in the pictures.
And so I think some of the anxiety comes from that, is that they've been very structured to do certain things and to achieve certain goals, and they want to do that. And especially our students, they come in as achievers. But there's also anxiety around then not figuring out how to apply those critical thinking skills to emotional reactions. So when I'm feeling a certain way, if they've been used to someone stepping in for them in a very caring and
well-intentioned
way to want to help, but then taking the pressure off of them to figure it out
how to manage
themselves
it,
and how to
right.
manage it themselves, when they go into a situation where that level of support is no longer there, they're scrambling on trying to figure out, do I have the skills to manage this? And sometimes they don't just yet, and sometimes it's helping them talk through and guide them through the process. Well, what do you think you should do? What might be helpful? We also see a lot of students not being able to either self-soothe or don't have great self-care in terms of being able to take a break or unplug or give themselves a break from what might be stressing them out, or kind of give themselves a pass if they didn't do as well as they thought they should have. And then things go on and we still do well and you're still a great person. And so I think there are a lot of pressures out there that our students face on a daily basis, and what can we as parents and educators do to help them navigate those, but to help them build the skills so they can eventually do it on their own and feel confident about it.
Because at the end of the day, that is really, as we said at the beginning, what most parents want for their kids is for them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And yet, ironically enough, so many of us want that.
Yeah.
And yet, when we've spoken in the past, you've mentioned to me that there's actually been an uptick, a considerable uptick, in the number of kids who can't operate independently very well, who don't have that skill set.
Yeah.
And I think you've mentioned that to me as well, Wes, and I know I've seen that as a principal, and I bet you've seen it, Jeannie, even in the middle school, where it's not quite as expected,
Right.
but that's where it's
Where it
beginning.
starts, and-
This is where they're supposed to start that independent work.
Well, if you take what you just stated to the logical cause of some of this inability to interact effectively with adults, our experiences as children were not plugged in. We weren't given a phone at an age, and we weren't surfing the internet and texting and Instagramming. And I mean, our parents now are millennial parents, and that they became young adults with the internet, and their children have known nothing but the internet. But part of that is, I don't know if you remember being kicked out of the car to go into Tedeschi's to get directions in a different town as to where the school was. Happened all the time. When you try to do that to a kid today, they're looking at you like, I'm not going into that store. Stranger danger, they're getting alarmed that you're asking them to go ask directions or somebody they don't know.
Yeah.
But they also have, a lot of students struggle with that whole navigating the interaction with adults. So when you ask them to go and advocate for themselves with a teacher, they may tell the parent they tried, and then you talk to the teacher, and the teacher never come to talk to me, and the student's a little intimidated by that interaction. So I think one of the areas that we need to encourage is that unplugging and interacting more and more. I think that's going to become more and more of a directive that counselors and general practitioner or family practicing doctors are going to talk to families with, make sure you have that time where you're interacting with your children, you're talking about issues, not just allowing them to kind of disengage. You don't want to be that family that shows up at a restaurant and you look over and everyone's in their phone.
Yes.
You want to make sure that personal interaction is there so that when they have to advocate for themselves, they have the skill set.
So would you actually recommend that people tell their kids to put their phones away at certain times?
Well, we do at school, and it works pretty well. When you're an effective teacher, and you say, listen, we're going into a 49-minute period here. There's no need for your phone to be out. Put it away.
So it's not just for a rule for the sake of a rule.
No.
But it's actually to say to the kids, look, there are times when you can go into that world.
Correct.
And there are times when you need to be here. We need your attention.
Right.
I will say that's one of the things that I'm happy about with my own children and my own family is that we had sit-down dinners.
Right.
We still do. If my older kids come home, we sit down and have dinner. And the absolute expectation is the phone goes away.
Right.
Why? Because I want to engage with them so that I can look them in the eye and say, how's it going? And vice versa.
Right.
And as a result of that, there's something about their growth that takes place. There's something that impacts them also. And I think what it is in fact that connection. When you go off to college, you're always, I like to think of it this way. With teenagers, when they're breaking away, they're still going like this. Make sure you're back there. They don't want you near them, but they do kind of want to know you're back there. Well, symbolically, I think, when they see that their family's there with them, that they have dinner with them every night, or there's routines that their family does, or they spend the summers together, and it's just the way it is, or in my summer cottage where we've had no TV for years, it's just the way it was.
Right.
That builds that confidence for my kids that they know who they are. They know who they are, and they know what family they came from. And that is a really solid foundation that's so important. And you talked, Pauline, about you'd hope that your kids would be caring. And I think of you, Jeanne, as one of the most caring staff members in Easton, not to embarrass you, but I really do see you as a very caring person. You shoot me emails, nice, caring, thoughtful things. How parents want to have caring kids. They want their kids to be empathetic, to be able to put themselves in other people's shoes. How do we teach that? How does a parent who's just getting going teach that to their kids?
Well, I think the biggest thing is we have to role model it ourselves. So our kids are watching us, even when we don't know they're watching us, and they're learning from us. So whether we're talking about wanting them to be present and put their phones away, but if we're on them, right? And if they're trying to have a conversation with us and we're kind of shooing them until we can finish that last email, they're getting a different message. Or interactions, ways in which they can observe us and how we speak to other adults or folks in authority, or how we greet people, how we make eye contact, how we are grateful and thank people for things that they do. I'm a big proponent still of handwritten thank you notes. And actually last night I had my kids write some thank you notes to some family members for some things that they did for them. And they're always sometimes questioning, well, why don't we just send them an email? Can't we just text them and say thank you? I said, no, it's really important that you put effort in to show that you care and you're grateful for something. And so I think a lot of it comes back to how we live our lives so that they can learn from us. And if they hold us, hopefully, in high regard and respect us, hopefully they'll follow suit with some of the things that we've taught them.
In the social emotional piece, I feel like in school, at a lot of the grades, but at 6th grade, so much of it is is building that in. I mean, when the kids come in, just the routine, first thing in the morning, they're number one, smile and say, "Good morning, Mrs. Baxter." And it sounds silly, but it's just habit. So at the end, I mean, at this point in the year, you're in the hall and the kids, it's just part of the culture that we try to create in the hope that this will go beyond the classroom. And talking about, you know, with the kids when there's problems, or when, you know, having that talk with the kid, you know, yeah, you didn't mean to be disrespectful, but when you talk like that, that's how it comes across. I mean, holding the kids accountable for what they say, and how beyond just writing them up on X2 or calling having the conversation with the child.
So that's interesting. So what you're saying is basically, for you, teaching caring to kids is sometimes through holding them accountable.
Absolutely.
It's saying no.
Yeah.
You know,
And calling them right on, and it's hard because then it's, you know, it's a, you don't want to embarrass them, and never in front of the kid.
Right.
But having those tough conversations, which I'm sure are happening at home.
Right.
But when kids are hearing it from a different parent and a different parent, teacher, a different person in a different place, I think it can be more powerful.
You know, I think about that a lot. I think, I mean, I've met so many kids over the course of my lifetime, and I'd say, you know, a lot of teaching is truly sad because of some of the sad situations you see kids come from.
Yeah.
And probably the most heartbreaking for me are the kids who I know, for some reason, don't feel loved at home. And, you know, I've thought about this so much because I remember once, I never hit my kids. It just wasn't something I did. But I said no a lot. Like, for example, I remember one day my daughter Mary, probably 3 years old, was running for the street. And I grabbed her by the arm really hard and told her, "No, don't you ever run away into the street, ever." Now, you could say, what a mean father. I mean, that's a little over the top. Or you could say, that kid just found out that her father really loves her. And he really doesn't want anything to happen to her. And that's the thing that I sometimes think is missing, and I think it's always tragic when I have a kid who's clearly crying out for help, desperately in trouble, and the parents are like, "Well, we don't know what to do." And the message to the kid is, "I give up." And I that breaks my heart, because I know for sure that one of the key components to a successful adult is knowing that they have that foundation of love. If that's gone, then they're adrift, and it's a very scary proposition, because then you get to self-destruction. You know, we talk about opioids. What are we going to do about the opioid crisis? Yeah, well, taking them away and making sure they're not accessible is part of the problem. But getting to the place where the kid doesn't feel like they want to destroy themselves is another part of the problem. Why does a person want to do that?
The
Well,
risky behavior.
I mean, if you don't care about
hurt.
yourself, because you have a perception that you're not really cared for, that's a problem. So these things are really linked.
And I think we've all had situations where there's been a student who has had some difficulty. And at the time, as you're holding them accountable and trying to explain how their individual behavior just doesn't impact them, but it impacts others. And they might be at a moment where they can't hear it, or they're so angry at you and they walk away. But then oftentimes years later, I'm sure this happens, students will come back and say, you know, I still remember the time where we had that conversation and I realized I was difficult, but you know what? You set me straight and I needed to hear it, and because of that, I made some changes. And I think that's a way to show that you care.
The hardest kids, you know, to love, but are the ones that need it the most. And I think our own kids, when they were acting the worst, is when they needed us there to help them or to guide them in a way, like we said, to manage it so they'd be better able to
Stay
do
away,
it on their own. Yeah.
Don't go too far.
That's right.
And the good side of this, too, is I think misbehavior and students doing various acts, and the acts change over the course of time with different vices that are there. With social media tends to be one that rears its ugly head more so than it didn't exist 10, 15 years ago the way it does today. But I think back to my own experience in high school, I don't think my classmates and I were aware socially of the need to care. and the need to be as respectful. There weren't as many clubs and activities that were generating, initiatives to support people in other countries and in our own communities. So we have raised a very strong generation of kids with an understanding of what it means to be respectful, because we now are teaching that more and more in subtle ways, where we bring guest speakers in and we have movements that take place in schools for Student Council or National Honor Society. We're teaching some of these core values, and our students are demonstrating a very strong understanding of that. I think what we're seeing, just like in the economy of the haves and the have-not separation, is alarming. I think sometimes the parents who have the skill sets and the stability to provide some of the love and care that is required to help their children grow up with the resiliency and the abilities to be happy. There are some other parents who have been impacted in the economy or in their own personal lives in such a way that it's tough to be a parent. You've got too many distractions in your own life that you didn't ask for, that cause that when you meet that child who's just, your heart's breaking for them because they're in a situation where the parenting that would help that child perhaps isn't there. But I'm quick not to blame the parent as much as the situation that this kid is. It's just a tragic situation that we're trying to figure out. And when they have compassionate people, my father was a college professor and also a pastor of a community church, and I still remember one of the sermons that my father preached, which was, not to get religious, but the concept stuck with me as a disciplinarian. It was, hate the sin, love the sinner. Very straightforward and simple concept of when you're dealing with the kid as an educator, you have to love the kid, and you have to make sure that kid walking away understands that, and that there was no disrespect.
Right.
And that certainly you understand their circumstances are really probably to blame for the situation at hand. Not always, but in a lot of cases it is.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, but these are hugely important topics, and I often think it would have been helpful for me to have to know what I know now, to have known it back then, and because I think I got caught up in a lot of the traps that were just right there, and I just didn't know they existed. So one of the things that I'm hoping that we'll be able to do in Easton is, in fact, come up with strategies for introducing some of these topics to parents at the very earliest ages. At the very earliest ages. Because parents, there's no question in my mind, parents want their kids to find happiness. They want them to be resilient and independent. They want them to be able to handle failure. We all know that it comes. We want our kids to be able to handle that. We want our kids to be empathetic and to be able to think about the challenges that others face and put ourselves in their shoes, and not only put ourselves in their shoes, but actually help them.
Right.
And one of these really cool initiatives going on right now is there was a report done out of Harvard Graduate School of Education by, it's called a Making Caring Common project, but it's the report is called Turning the Tide, and it's inspiring concern for others and the common good through college admissions. And what it's really about is getting colleges to start looking at kids through that lens. Did they care for others? Did they care about the common good? So not just empathy, like I can put myself in your shoes and say, wow, I feel bad for you, but actually doing something about it.
Yeah.
Like, I not only feel bad for you, but I'm going to go that extra mile to help you. Why? Because it's best for the common good. This is a really cool thing that I think people should look at. It's called Turning the Tide. And you could just look under Making Caring Common at Google that, and it's a fascinating study. Rick Weisbord, who's a professor at Harvard Graduate School of Education, is really all over this, creating schools that care, and he's done some great research, and so I think it's definitely worth checking out. I'm so glad that you guys could join me for this. And I guess what I'd like to leave you with is a question. If you could do anything for your children, if you could just turn back that clock and do something a little different as a parent, what do you think it would be? Don't overanalyze this, but what do you think you would do differently? I'll start.
Yes.
I would say no more. I'd say no more. I think I would make my kids do more yard work, more chores, more making dinner. I think I would do more of that. Not because I wanted to punish my kids, but because I love them, and I think it's really important.
I think I'd have to step back more. I'm thinking when the kids were, you're just always so nervous, wanting, like, you know, that each thing was gonna, like, impact them. I mean, in some ways it does, some decisions, but like if they're not doing this sport, or if they're not doing that, or if they're with this group of friends or not. I mean, I think just so anxious all the time. And healthy, again, coming from a good place and wanting the best, but maybe just letting things happen the way they're going to happen sometimes.
For better or for worse.
For better or for worse. And be there, certainly, to support, but not always. You know, you can think of just like lying in bed at night thinking, okay, this is what I'll do tomorrow. So then, I know it's not healthy. You're thinking I haven't changed. That's what I do.
I feel like every day I think of how I could have done things better. You know, always wanting to be better at what you do and have your kids learn from that. Probably along the same lines of what you said. Growing up, there were certain expectations that I had as being a member of the family. And as we talk about wanting our kids to be contributing members of society, they first have to feel as if they're contributing to the family. And we had to earn things in my family, and I came from a family with not a lot of means, and so you had to work for what you wanted, and even if it was something you had to buy, you had to work for that. But even if it was a privilege that you wanted, you had to show that you were contributing to the family. And I think I've started that a little too late. I'm starting it now with. We've done some of it, but with my middle schooler especially.
It's never too late.
That's right. Right. He wants to do certain things. He's too young to have a job, and I said, "Well, how are you going to earn your way here?" I said to him the other day, he wasn't too thrilled, but I said, "I need you to draft a proposal of things that you're going to do that will then earn you a little bit of an allowance, so then you can do some of the things that you want to do." And he said, "Can't I just say it to you? Do I have to write it down?" I said, "No, you have to write it down." So I think
same kid that didn't want to write the
that's
thank
right.
yous.
Can I just text it to you? So I think it's building the responsibility early on, and know that no matter what age they're at, that they're an important contributing member to the family, and that they have responsibilities that go along with that. And so I think I would have started that earlier.
Excellent.
And I think I connect with everything you guys are saying, and I guess the one I would add to it would be, and it's different for each of your children probably.
Absolutely. I
But
was just thinking that.
I think of one of my daughters, and I won't name names. She was very involved and was in a group of friends who were very involved in sports and academics, and pushed herself extremely hard. And I think if I could go back to that period of time from 8th grade to 12th grade, I would have been a better counselor and trying to figure out what she could take a step back from. That you know, we've talked about that race to nowhere, where you know, our kids are competing in everything and trying to build a resume to show the world that they've got all the right stuff, and then we see them in college and they're not really emotionally ready for the right stuff. That perhaps as parents we need to understand and better scale back the things that they're involved with, so that the stress that we see in our children when they're staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning doing homework and then getting up at 6:30 to get ready for school, that we just don't chalk it up and say, well, it's just part of high school. That maybe we need to do a better job of saying, I don't know if you really need to do this or this or this. And that's our role as parents is to see how our students are doing, and not just say, well, they seem to be managing it, so I guess it's okay, and other kids have managed it. But the more we allow our children to do that, the more the other children who come along, they compare themselves, and they see the child who was Mr. Everything or Mrs. Everything or Miss Everything that went through high school, and they want to emulate that because they think that's the ticket to get into the school that that particular child got into. So,
What about successes? Something that you think you did a good job with, that you're proud of? I mean, I think of myself, I'm really glad that I let my kids see me fail. And I wasn't shy about it. I mean, they knew that I went for jobs and didn't get them. They'd see that rejection. I found a beautiful note from one of my daughters telling me, just remember, Dad, of the impact you've had on people's lives, even if you don't get this job. I mean, that was really important. I'm so glad that my kids were able to see me fail, because that gives them permission to fail as well. Can you think of things that you think that you did it right?
I'll give you guys a break because I got to
No
go.
comment.
Yeah, go
They're
ahead.
still growing.
Too early to say?
Yeah, and I think talking to Janet, my wife, about this show, and parenting in the new millennium, and and I said we kind of parented in the old millennium. She goes, we're still parenting, and she was so right that we are still, 24, 22, 20, but we're still parenting. And I think the thing that I perhaps am the most proud of with our children is their understanding of responsibility. That was something that was very important to us, as they understood that there was a personal level of responsibility and a consequence for every decision they made, and that we wanted them to think that through and to kind of embrace what, for better or for worse, and be able to understand what was going on. So that was something that Janet and I really focused on with our kids, was taking that level of responsibility. So that's probably, and it's a trait that I think we want to see in our children. So I'm happy for that.
Well, these two are really still going, so they can't really.
We don't want to.
No, if you think of anything.
Yeah, I would say your children sometimes act differently when they're around you than when they're around other people. And so sometimes I think, is this really how you act when you're out in public or in school? Or, and I think they just have a sense of that unconditional love that I can let loose or be more cranky or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And this focus on kindness and being polite and being respectful. And so we've always taught our kids to be that way, and basic manners go with that, and I think go a long way. And we've had a couple situations recently, one in which my kids went to my in-laws for the week for vacation, and another one where there was a play date with one of my children, and in both instances, the folks said, your children are so polite. And I thought, are you talking about my children? Because I don't see that often, but it was, thank you so much, please, and I really appreciate this. This has been, and so it was nice to hear that sometimes we might not always see it, but that the messages and the role modeling that we're hoping sinks in, sometimes sinks in and we don't know it.
Awesome.
So it's a little success
Yep.
that I'll hang on to at this
awesome.
point.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And when you had just said that, saying how other people recognizing that
Yes.
your kids are polite, and I can just think of twice, once with both kids, being out at a restaurant and the kids, you can all relate,
Yes.
either throwing a tantrum or not acting. And you get up and leave, and I can clearly remember both, Jonathan at a restaurant in Millis and Abby at a park, at Bird Park in Walpole. And it was just both, and I don't think either of them believed that I would do it.
Good for you.
Like this is, and that's the thing, because it doesn't just happen. It doesn't, and that, the good and the bad.
No, it's work, isn't it?
Oh, it really is.
It's hard work.
And when I was working at Moreau Hall, and the kids were real little, so I'd leave work and put in a full day's work, like all of us work hard. But I can remember thinking, now my real job begins.
Yes.
And you leave, and it's a lot of pride. I mean, I felt like and I still do, because that's where your effort is.
And so making sure you have other parents who can support
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
and who you can have some of these conversations with and get the reassurance that you're not
Absolutely.
alone, and yes, parenting is hard and we make mistakes,
Yeah.
and then we move on from them.
And
So I
making
think that network
time.
is important.
Like when the kids were little, like not being able, you can't do other things. Like
Yeah.
they say, parents can have it all, just not all at the same time. You know,
Yeah,
you
that's
can't-
right, exactly.
And you don't go out to eat. You don't do this. You do the family dinner because that's what matters at different ages when they're not out at sports, and then you're
Right.
eating fast food on the
Yeah.
bleachers.
Yeah.
But there's so much here, and along these lines, I think we are going to try and have like a Easton Community Ed offering for people to have those conversations, to have these conversations. You're right. I think people need to talk to other parents and say, what do you do with this situation? I remember when my mother told me one little secret that worked for her with little kids, and we used it. And she used to say to us, apparently, I don't remember it, "Oh, that's okay. Go ahead and cry. You can cry for 5 more minutes, okay? Go ahead and cry. And when the 5 minutes up, we're going to get back to what we were doing." And I'd go and scream, and I guess. And I tried it with my children. It was an amazing trick. Like, they wanted to cry, fine, go ahead and cry. You have 5 minutes, go cry over there, though, please. We got things to do over here. And they always come back, and that was the end of it.
Yes.
Worked like a charm. So thank you all, really, for joining me today, and for your thoughtful reflections. And perhaps we can pull together to get this thing and the Easton Community Ed thing off the ground. I think it might be helpful to parents. Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
great.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.